to the farm. I am very anxiously awaiting a very special delivery for today. We just ordered a freeze dryer. And probably about a year ago, I got the question on the channel in one of our Q&As, where are you on the freeze dryer trend? And at this time, we really didn't have a bunch of food production happening here, so I felt like it really didn't fit for us at that time. But then we had our gardening season last year where we just pulled in literal wagonfuls of tomatoes and peppers and melons, and I did spend a lot of time sweating over the canner that summer. And I love canning. Canning is definitely one of my favorite ways to preserve food, but also I can really get on board with the idea of freeze drying at this point, and so I'm super excited for that to arrive. So far, I don't know when it's getting here. It says by the end of the day, so I've been trying to busy myself. Currently I'm making a Monterey Jack cheese and it's almost time to flip it over. So I'm just gonna kind of take you with my waiting period and hopefully through the delivery of our freeze dryer today. I'm making cheese and I am gonna harvest a tiny bit out of the garden today because there are some things that definitely need to come out. And of course we'll peek at the baby goats. We gotta do that. So this is my third ever hard cheese that I have ever made. I've made quite a few like soft cheeses, some cream cheese, I've made cottage cheese, mozzarella, things like that. But I was kind of scared to jump into the world of hard cheeses. I am still kind of scared, but if I never do it because I'm scared, I'm never gonna do it at all. So I'm just gonna do it scared, as one of my favorite YouTubers, Jess from Roots and Refuge, she loves to say that. Very encouraging. This cheese is just getting its first flip. So I'm not ready to make a full-on cheese making video yet. I want to know that I can do it before I make the video. However, I kind of can take you through some of the process. This has only been pressing its first press, so you can still see the little cheese curds there. And I'm gonna flip this over and press it again. And as I keep flipping and pressing this cheese, those little curd lines will just melt away and all of this will knit together and become a nice little round of cheese. It's working out so far. Okay, flip that over, put this back in the press, and then we'll go outside. So one of the things that I'm most excited to tackle in this new freeze dryer is the drying of herbs for teas. I have grown chamomile for about, I think this is the third season that we've grown chamomile, and we'll probably grow chamomile forever because chamomile is just one of those things that once you plant it, it just is so prolific with setting seed that it just comes back year after year. And I can attest to that being absolutely true. So we've got lots of chamomile, I've got different versions of mint. So I've got regular peppermint, I have lemon balm, and I do have some oregano, which is in the mint family. And all of those have come back year after year as well, and all of those have multiple uses here on our farm. And I have air dried these things in the past. There's nothing wrong with air drying. It works very, very well. But I'm really drawn to using the freeze dryer for herbs because you can kind of lock in the constituents of the herbs and the nutrition at its peak ripeness. From what I understand, most foods retain 97+% of their nutritional value from when you put it in the freeze dryer, up to 25 years, which is absolutely insane to me. That's like unfathomable, but I'm really excited. So my chamomile actually looks like it sort of fell down. I did run my sprinkler earlier, but I also kind of think that some of my kids came through here looking for toads. They find lots of toads in the garden. I actually saw a little baby rabbit in my garden this morning. I got really excited. I don't know where it lives. I don't know where the nest is, but it was hopping around having a good old time. As far as I know, they haven't caused any damage in here, at least not yet. So with the freeze dryer, you can put things in it just like this, room temperature, just picked out of the garden. And what it's gonna do is it will freeze that for you. It'll pre-freeze it for you, and then it will do the freeze drying process. Or to save a little bit more time and energy with the freeze dryer, you can pre-freeze things. And I think that's actually pretty awesome. It buys me a little bit of time to collect a good amount of any kind of herb or thing before I go ahead and run the freeze dryer. All I'm doing here is just picking off the heads of the chamomile flower and sticking them in the jar. I'll probably put this entire jar in the freezer, and then later on when I've got the freeze dryer set up, I can actually just sprinkle it out onto the tray and get to drying. It's intoxicating. It's delicious. The oregano is definitely a little bit different in the way that we're going to harvest this. So when I go to dry the oregano, if I were to hang dry it, I would leave it on the stems, hang it upside down for a few weeks until it's nice and dry, and then I would be able to take the leaves off of the stems at that point, crumble them up and use them in my cooking. I'm actually gonna put this through the freeze dryer without the stems, so I'll be inside later picking these off. But first I've got to harvest. And when I harvest my oregano, I am very brutal with it. I give this a very, very serious haircut. Right now the oregano is probably 2 feet tall, and I'll take, let's say, a good 18 inches straight off the top. Just like that. There we go. Great big harvest of oregano, and our chamomile is in here. We got quite a lot off of the chamomile for our first harvest. I'm impressed. And the oregano, it looks kind of sad over there, and it might get a little bit yellow for a time because these lower leaves were shaded by those upper leaves, and so they might get a little bit scalded by the sun, but I assure you this is gonna bounce back. I do heavy haircuts like this 3 times a year. So over here in front of my house is this giant lemon balm patch, and we purchased the house with this blessing already installed. And I do have some peppermint in here as well. It's a little bit smaller of a plant, it's not as well established, but it has spread probably 100 times the size of what I put in. This here is peppermint, and I think I put in a sprig about this size in 2019. And there's a whole bunch. Now it's mixed in here with lemon balm. You can see the difference here in the leaf shape. It's a lot more wide and spade shaped, and this is a lot more long and angular. And then obviously you can tell the difference in the smell. Definitely peppermint, and the lemon balm is distinctly more lemony. Let me break it open. Yeah, absolutely, it's amazing. I'll harvest this lemon balm and mint exactly the same way as I harvested the oregano, but I'll go ahead and do that off camera. Look what I got. Come here. Here she comes. Come on. Calamity? No.
Dry the mint and other leaves.
That's right.
So that's what I want. I thought we could milk.
We can do milk too. We can do meat. We can do fruit. We can do melons.
Yeah. Well, we can spin.
Okay. That just sets in there. So there's a little bit of a delay in shipping, but the freeze dryer is here. And thank goodness for good neighbors with good tools, we were able to get the freeze dryer up the driveway without a problem. And it is now installed in our homestead overflow shed. So if you haven't been with the channel very long, you may not know that we live in a double wide trailer out on our 9.5 acres. And there's not a whole lot when you're a 6-person family. There's not a whole lot that you can really fit inside of that. And Sometimes when you're homesteading and preserving your own food, especially with dairy animals, there are just a lot of bulky things. And so it's really hard to have all of the homesteady things that we wanted and also have room to kind of move around in our house. So my husband Levi built this shed with his brother and one of his friends, and it has been a really awesome blessing. So we're able to store a whole bunch of things in here. It's got power, and this is where we will be running our freeze dryer. So speaking of power, we bought the large freeze dryer from Harvest Right. It's got 5 larger trays, and it does need its own 20 amp power source. So we have its own dedicated plug here. It's to its own dedicated breaker. That's because this thing kind of draws a lot of power. So in talking about the power that it can draw, it needs its own power source for sure, but so does things like your refrigerator. And so those will probably draw about the same amount of power. And the difference, this is kind of one of the things that sold me on a freeze dryer. The difference being this machine is going to draw that power for maybe 36 hours, depending on what you're freeze drying. And then that's it. And that food is then preserved for up to 25 years, depending on what it is. Usually about 10 to 25 years on average. But if I were to run a freezer for that long, number one, anything like especially meat or something like that, anything that I've got in the freezer really isn't going to hold up well for that length of time. Plus, the freezers are running all the time. Of course, they shut off every once in a while because they don't need to run all the time, but they have to cool themselves down every so often. And so while there is a little bit of investment in cost, in energy cost to put the food away, over the length of that food being preserved, it's actually cheaper to preserve food with this. So not only does it cost less over time to store our food, our homegrown food long term, but actually freeze drying will help retain a lot of the nutrients that can get lost with other preservation processes like canning and dehydrating. When I freeze dry something in this Harvest Right freeze dryer, it's like 97% of the nutrition value is retained. So in contrast with our dehydrator, there's only about 60% of the nutrition left once the food comes out of the dehydrator. And that's because the dehydrator uses heat to dry out the food, and that heat breaks down the nutrients. This, what it does is it actually super cools the food. It freezes it to -30 or below, which is unfathomable. That is so cold. And then it creates a vacuum, and that vacuum, my pamphlet says it sublimates. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but essentially it takes that water that's inside the food from a solid, because it's frozen, straight into a gas, and it just sucks it out of the food and makes it 99% water free. So because of that, the food is essentially in like a state of stasis. It just kind of freezes. It just doesn't age until you add more water to it, and then it can be almost just like new. Now, it's not going to be perfect, so I'm not going to be able to freeze dry like apple slices and have them be super crisp, but the nutrition is going to remain essentially the same when we eat it. We could rehydrate it or not, and it's still the same. The aroma and the flavor are all going to stay intact. So I was going to take you through the freeze drying process with my herbs in this video, but after going through the manual last night, I realized that I need to let this sit here for 24 hours before I run it at all. And the first cycle really needs to be done with bread, apparently, to draw out the kind of new car smell. So that makes total sense. So I am going to do my dehydrating or my freeze drying of my herbs in a completely separate video, but I promised you guys some goats. So we'll end this video with some adorable baby goats. So I'll have some information about the freeze dryer in the pinned comment and in the description box below if you'd like to check it out. And again, we did go with the large model that requires the dedicated 20 amp plug, but I think the medium and the small, they can just do a regular old household plug. Hey ma'am, I don't have a bottle. Nope. Most of the babies are napping. Tori is not. So thank you so much, guys, for coming along with me in the delivery of our freeze dryer. So we've gotten a lot of brand new gadgets. Oh my gosh! We're at the not safe to crouch stage of these baby goats, clearly. As I was saying, thank you guys so much for coming back to the farm. Sorry it took me a second to get this vlog out. We were delayed, like I said, with the shipment of that freeze dryer. Took me a couple years to really get on the freeze dryer bandwagon. I don't necessarily think that freeze dryers make sense for everyone, but considering the volume of everything that we've been bringing in the last year and a half or so, I think it makes sense for us, and I'm super excited to have it.